Now we're going to focus, and as I was saying last night, for those of you who heard, the result of our time together is really in your hands much more than in mine, because I'm just a conduit for the greater reality that we're all a part of, and you all are actually the magnet. And so if there's no magnetism from you, then I've never actually run out of words, but the words get much less interesting. And I talk what I think is half an hour, and I've talked about 4 minutes because it's the flow of energy that really makes it happen. And that flow is created by your sincerity. It doesn't have to be an intellectual idea, but just the sincerity that we're here together. There's something that we all can learn. Life is nothing but progress toward freedom. That's 100% of what we're doing here. And progress is, the good news is, well, let me put it this way. I've been teaching for many years. The path I follow is one of discipleship, very orthodox, really. It's radical because Swami Kriyananda, the American Swami who was my teacher for all my years of spiritual practice, still is, but he's been out off the planet for almost a decade now. He was very innovative, so we seem very original and forward looking. Lunatic fringe is the phrase I like, but not everyone likes that. Lunatic fringe, just doing new territory, but it's also extremely orthodox path that I follow because it comes from Paramhansa Yogananda, and it goes back to Babaji, it goes back to Jesus, the great tradition of India. And so it's not a lightweight story. So we're talking about gurus, and when I'm in my natural habitat, I always have big picture of Yogananda, big picture of Swami Kriyananda, often all five of the masters. So you come in there and um, you're not in Kansas anymore. You're somewhere, right? Okay. So people are often talking to me about, well, I don't want to have a guru. I want to do it myself. Why should I let somebody else do it for me? And my answer is, honey, no such luck. Nobody's going to do it for you. It's a pipe dream on your part that you think you can hand responsibility for your life over to someone else and then just take a free ride after that. That's called missing the point. That's in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. There's actually one of his warnings. I love it. It was written in ancient Sanskrit, and the word is missing the point. When I first read that, I said to Swamiji, really, there's a Sanskrit phrase that means missing the point? He said, yeah, that's exactly right. Because missing the point is a universal fact, isn't it? That we think we're doing it, but we're missing the point. It has a particular nuance to it. So missing the point fundamentally is to think that somehow there is an effortless way to freedom. And so we are not always only looking for a clear and true path, but some part of us is looking for an easier path. And one of the things that we have to just get over is that very thought. I once bought an icon from some company that makes icons, modern icons. And because of that, I got on their email list, which in this case turned out to be quite pleasant, in addition to the fact that I was invited to buy many icons. I've never bought another one. But they would also give me stories of saints and holy people that I'd never heard of. Now, I can't remember his name now, but he was a priest in Chicago or Detroit or some, quintessential American place. And because there's so much emphasis in Christianity on serving the underprivileged, which is a perfectly fine emphasis, he lived in some greatly deprived part of whatever city that was and became a saint by his service to others. And so I got this wonderful phrase from him: do not pray for tasks that equal your powers. Pray for the power that equals your tasks. And so simple, Sometimes a whole lifetime just gets summed up in that. And we're not generally praying, but we often pray not for the power to succeed, but for someone to rescue us. And that waiting to be rescued is one of the greatest detriments to personal development. Because instead of just standing up and seeing what's required of us and trying to find our connection to the greater reality so that that power will be accessible to us, we just pray and pray and pray to be rescued and then feel like no one is listening. And whether we're praying as I do, because I'm very comfortable with the idea of God and Guru and Divine Mother and all of that, it's very natural to me. Whether we have a deity that we actually are asking to help us, or whether it's just the way our inner energy is moving, the truth of it is what we actually think we're doing is quite irrelevant to compare to what we're actually doing. What we're actually doing is we're vibrating in a certain way at a certain level of awareness. And that is our truth. We can call it the great white elephant. We can call ourselves atheists. We can call ourselves Catholics or Hindus. And the greater reality doesn't care what we call it because it's a magnetic universe. It's an energy universe. It's energy to energy. So the kind of energy and magnetism you're putting out, that's who you are. That's what your reality is. What people say is really quite unimportant. But I had a very interesting experience with the waiting to be rescued. In 1987, my teacher, Swami Kriyananda, asked me to move from the idyllic country ashram that I'd been living in for 16 years next door to where Swami Kriyananda lived. Everything was like perfect. And he knew that I had a different destiny. I worked for him as his secretary for a few years, only a few years. And it really, the phrase wasn't in vogue at that time, personal assistant, but that was really what my job was. And at a certain point, and my entire life, I was totally happy. My entire life was just, he was so much fun to be with. All the work that we did was so enjoyable. And I was living in the monastery at that time, and I just walked around with my pencil and my pen all the time, and I just stood next to him and told him who he was talking to and what they gave him for Christmas. I just kept track of his life. He met so many people. I would say, this is Catherine. She gave you the red sweater. Oh, Catherine, thank you for the red sweater. It wasn't that he was being untruthful. It was just that I was half his brain, which is what you do when you have that kind of a job. And then one day he announced to me that we weren't going to do this anymore. And he sent me off to be on the staff of the retreat that we had. And just different. And he said, I was shocked, really. I just hadn't crossed my mind that I wasn't going to just do that for the rest of my life. And I said, basically, why can't I just keep doing this? He said, well, because it wouldn't fulfill your destiny for you to do that. It wouldn't fulfill you. That's what he said. You wouldn't be happy. I was maybe 27 at that point. I said, I have an idea, sir. Why don't we just try it? I'll just walk around with this pen and pencil for the next 50 years, and at the end, we'll see if it worked or not. And he always understood not just what you said, but what you intended. And he was so sensitive in his responses because he could always feel deeper than I even knew myself. He could feel what I really intended because he had no personal agenda. We misunderstand each other all the time because if we actually understood what was happening around us, it would be something we don't want. So it's easier to just slightly misunderstand. Or we deeply want to understand, but we just don't have the objective freedom to be able to understand. Swami had no agenda. He just had no personal agenda. He was interested in what was true, and he wanted to help people. Last night, Atul asked me just sort of how come these words just keep coming. And I really don't know. I have no answer. I just give credit. If the pictures were behind me, I would point. But I'll point to Swami. And I said, but I really want to help people. I really do. I've suffered. I've suffered spiritually in past lives, suffered from ignorance, suffered from lack of meaning. We help others in the way that we've suffered. It's very interesting to watch what you're drawn to. Many people are drawn to help animals, for example, just, the helpless, inarticulate creatures. I'm too intellectual to really work with animals because there's so little verbal content. I just going to riff for a moment here. My friend, uh, a dear lady, has a little dog. She adores her little dog. The charms of that dog are lost on me, but we were all sharing a house for a number of days, and the dog was there too. And I decided that my disinclination for the dog was not to my credit. So I decided to take the dog out and do what the dog wanted, which was to throw the tennis ball. The dog didn't know to bring the tennis ball all the way to your feet. Somehow 8 feet was the distance that the dog thought. No amount of persuasion on my part could persuade the dog to bring it to me. So we did this endlessly. And I wanted the dog to know it was almost over. So I explained to the dog that this was the penultimate toss. And then I came back inside and I told the owner of the dog that I had taught the dog a new word, which was penultimate, which means the next to the last. And the dog owner just looked at me as if I was crazy. But I had to create some verbal content for my interaction. So I taught the dog a new vocabulary word, which I don't think she retained. But anyway, moving right along, where was I? I was talking about wanting to help people. And so anyway, Swamiji sent me off to do something else because that was my fulfillment. And then ultimately, he sent me to another community, and I never lived in that proximity with Swamiji for the next, 30 years that he lived. And I was helping to develop the community where I am now in Palo Alto, and there were many days when I wished I had another assignment. And at one point, Swamiji announced that he was going to send me to another place, to the East Coast, as it were, at that point. And I got really happy about that. And then that didn't work out. And he said to me, I think you should think that you might die in place. Not soon, but that we had created something that was that was shaped like us. And so, when you have a leader who has created something that's shaped like them, it's very hard to pull that leader out. Subsequently, I've managed to extricate myself to a large extent. I'm emeritus from where I live now. But what happened was I realized that when he was offering me a new assignment and then it was taken away, a very interesting thing happened to me. I realized in how many ways, even at that point, which would have been in the mid-90s, I was still waiting to be rescued. And there were all these things in my world, people I didn't like, responsibilities I felt inadequate to carry out, a corner of the garden where I just couldn't make anything grow, a closet that was just so disorganized and I never had the energy to go in there and organize it. I mean, those were just some that I could remember. And I realized in all cases I was waiting to be rescued. And I assumed most of my peers within Ananda have lived in many communities, in even in many countries. I'm not the only one, but of all my peers, of which we are a very large group, I've lived in two places in 50 years. And some of them have lived in 5 or 6, because it's just the way our community works. We're building a worldwide work, and so you go live here, you go live there, and it's partly assigned and partly volunteer. We work together, we work cooperatively. But when I realized that I might die in place, which last night, for those of you who were there, death is something that I always think about. And I think about it quite cheerfully, which simply means that nothing lasts forever. And that, to me, you always have to be realizing that there will be the moment when this one is over. And you want to be able to feel at peace. If you've ever tried to help someone pass who is not at peace with their life, that's a very hard position, and I never want to be there. I want to be current. I mean, I have a friend now who was just as vital as she could be 2 months ago and now is in hospice. You know, these things happen these days. So that whole mindset of what am I waiting for before I face it? You know, it's not that we can do everything or make everything right, but it's the thought in our mind that I don't really have to do this. And this is where reincarnation is really a really, really good friend of ours in two ways. One is, if this one is just too big for me, I'll just wait and I'll get another chance on it. A woman came to me at one point and she she just extricated herself from an awful relationship, romantic relationship. And she came to me and she said, I want you to help me finish this karma. I said, I don't think so. I think we can inch it forward a little, but I think the chances, just, knowing what you've been dealing with, I think you can get better, but I don't think you can finish this one. But we'll move it forward. So it's not like we can just get everything all like that, but we can always just move it forward a little bit. So reincarnation gives us the relaxation. Too big, not now. Later. And that's a relaxation sometimes. When I was involved in a very confusing personal situation, and finally there was some separation in it, and Swamiji said to me, maybe the karma's over, like that. And he kind of just let that hang in the air, and inwardly I went, yep. And then he said, but I don't think so. And then I went, like that. He knew that if he could make me laugh, I would listen more carefully. And he had a good sense of humor, and he was very, very clever with the humor. He always could make me laugh, and then once I started to laugh, I would do it. He said, but I don't think so. But then he said, you've taken it as far as you can take it. He said, you have to grow in other ways before you're going to be able to face this. Now, that's different than waiting to be rescued. That's just self-honesty. Yogananda, much of the spiritual teaching is challenging and not comforting, but much of the spiritual teaching is also comforting. Paramhansa Yogananda, who was a world-conquering sort of personality, said, if a test is too big for you, and you should run away. Which you rarely get, affirmation for that kind of an impulse. But he said, because it's not good for you to get the concept in your mind that you're a failure and that you can't cope. He said, it's better just to step away from it and just wait until you're stronger before it comes back. And trust me, it will come back. It's not the same as waiting to be rescued. It's just saying realistically, this is too much for me. I need to grow in other ways. And that was precisely what Swami said to me. But when he told me I was going to have to live where I was living, conceivably, although I did actually move about 100 yards, I thought I might have to stay literally in that same apartment for the rest of my life. I just was appalled to realize how many things I just still had my head under the covers. And I just thought, what do I think is going to happen here? How do I think all of this is ever going to be resolved? And that's where, on the other side of reincarnation, besides I have all the time in the world, literally, I have literally eternity to sort this out. I'm presenting reincarnation. When I first heard about it when I was an 18-year-old Jewish girl born in El Paso, which is not like exactly the center of cosmopolitan thought, especially in the time that I was there. Maybe it's different now. It's been 70 years, or 60 years. But I just started using it as like a scientist would, like a theory that I was going to experiment with and see if it made sense, see if it was proven by my experience. And gradually, it just made more sense than anything else I could think of. It explains so many anomalies in my own personal life and in things that I saw. But that's a whole different subject. But the other side of reincarnation is if I don't solve it now, I'm just going to have to solve it later, and later is going to be now. And if I'm not enjoying it now, what makes me think I will enjoy it then, which will be now? And sometimes I think once with this karma is once too many. I don't want to just put it aside and wait, see what happens next, because I'll just have to face it again. And when we don't stand up straight with a realistic assessment of our power, see, everything is a little dual. Sometimes, and one part of the weird thing is sometimes we don't even actually know what we're being asked to learn. Sometimes what we're being asked to learn is to admit that I can't deal with this. And sometimes what we're being asked to learn is I can deal with this. So it's all very subtle, and there is no dogma. The path of self-realization, as Swamiji has taught us through Ananda, is completely undogmatic. You just can't get the rules. The rules are that you have to be absolutely authentic and humble in whatever is the truth for me at this time. And of course, the other half of it is that whatever is true for me at this time is merely the stage I'm passing through. I mean, everything about our life, everything about every living thing is that we're always seeking experiences, and we're always seeking to greater awareness. I mean, we are the river heading for the sea. And no matter what that river has to go through, it just has this commitment that it's going to go to the sea. And the pronoun I, which is a very confusing pronoun, because when we say I, which level of ourselves are we talking about? We tend to think of ourselves, if we were thinking in terms of athletes, we tend to think of ourselves as the solitary cross-country runner who's, just going over hill and dale, and just this one force. But we're not. We're like a soccer team inside our heads. We have star players who can just do it marvelously. We have someone who's only there because their father makes them play and they hate the game, And just depending on how the wind is blowing and how the karma is flowing, we either have the ball and we're scoring all the goals, or we're just sort of under the bench hoping that people will forget that we're even there. And so when we say I, we're all these things at the same time, depending on the moment. And our development is to gradually bring all the reluctant ones up and to give the ball as much as possible to the star players so that they can run ahead. And we're just operating on all these different levels completely at the same time. And we just have to be patient. We have to be completely authentic. This is who I am today. This is who I am tomorrow. For many years earlier in my life, I realized, I don't think I've done this in a long time, but I have always had good physical health, so I rarely got a break by getting sick, only once in a while. I had a wonderful COVID. I just got sick enough that everybody left me alone and I was completely isolated, but not so sick that I couldn't just lie in bed and read novels and have a wonderful time, but sick enough that I could read bad novels and think they were good, So it was just wonderful. It was perfect. But I rarely get ill, but I would self-declare, and I would self-declare that I have the punies. That's what I would call myself. I'm just too puny to live my life today. And I would just lie down and read a novel. That was my escape, has been my escape. I have the punies, and that's just who I am. I'm not proud of it, and I'm not embarrassed, because most of spiritual growth is having the courage to be authentic. We think of it, we get very confused because we see people, whatever value system you're working with. I mean, my heroes are saints and masters, but it can be corporate executives, wherever you are, or yoga teachers, of course. You see people who you would like to be like. And then the idea thinks somehow that if I behave like they do, if I dress like they do, if I start talking like they talk, or whatever it might be. In other words, we try to see what it looks like to be that person, and we try to put that on. And we can do it quite sincerely, and a certain amount of that is beneficial, because we sort of get a feeling for what it is to be that way. Sometimes when no one is watching, if I see someone has a particularly unusual posture or a particularly unusual walk or an odd way inflection when they speak, I'll imitate it. Because what would it feel like, to walk like that? To have the energy that flows through you manifest in that way, what would it be like? So I try to understand in my way what people uh, are what people are feeling, so that I can be of help to them, especially if it's something that seems very distant from me. So there is a certain thing. What would it feel like? Swami Kriyananda had this posture um, where he was very, very intelligent, which I really enjoyed. I joke that intelligence is my hobby. It's not the same as being a spiritual person, but it's my hobby. I like it. And he was very, very intelligent, so it was extremely entertaining. Um, but his intelligence was an order of magnitude beyond anything I knew. Because it wasn't only that he was wise, he was able to discern the essence of situations in a way. Really, we were a bright group of young people around him, and we would find a conundrum. And whenever we brought it to him, just in a very calm, not at all a low, I'm tuning into the infinite sort of way, he would just understand it in a way that was so obvious once he said it. We'd wonder how we could miss it. I began to wonder, like, why is he, what makes him so bright? And at that time, as he grew older, his posture shifted. He had a heart operation and things like that. But when he was younger, his body, the image in a lot of the epics is of the strung bow. If you know anything of the Mahabharata and the soldier Arjuna, and when Arjuna gets discouraged, he unstrings his bow. And what that means is, if you look at a strung bow, the spine is straight and the heart is lifted. So there's a curve in the front and a straight line in the back. And when I would look at Swami from the side, the part of him that led in life was his heart. Even though I was more aware of his, well, that's not true, but he had this powerful intelligence. And my posture at that point was a little bit to lean like that. I just like the plane of my energy. I would start with the frontal lobe and I would push against the world like that. And Swami just had this open heart, because you can't raise your heart like that without also opening it. And a lot of times this posture, people think of it as the spine, but it's actually the tender heart being drawn in and hoping to be protected. And reason follows feeling. This is one of Yogananda's aphorisms. If we have a feeling in a certain direction, our mind will support it. And because Swamiji's feeling was just, what is the truth and how can I serve, nothing blocked his ability to think truthfully. His reason would always support what his heart was leaning toward. These are very, very subtle things. I've spent decades of my life trying to integrate these. But so I would imitate Swami's posture, especially when I began to understand. When we meditate the way Kriya Yoga works, you have the spiritual eye, which we think of as being here, between the eyebrows, but in fact the spiritual eye is this field of energy that's right in front of you. You're not cross-eyed in. It's this field of energy that's here, and mostly our consciousness is settled, centered in the medulla, because that's the point of ego identification with this body. So the question is whether or not, from the perspective of ego identification with this body, are we looking downward and thinking about this? Are we looking from that to the spiritual eye? Yogananda teaches that these are opposite poles of the same chakra. Not every chakra system has that. So you're resting here, but your attention is going this way, like that. But what I also realize is when you start looking like that, automatically your heart starts going that way too. And so what you're actually doing is, you could say opening, but you're lifting. You're lifting it into the light. Very simple things. So it served me when I would see myself like that. to try to just imitate his posture, because by imitating his posture, I was attuning to that consciousness that it represented. It wasn't me trying to be like Kriyananda. It was me trying to understand what made him who he was, and then finding out how I authentically could make myself that same vibration. And this is not easy because we have pride, we have fear, we have misunderstandings, we miss the point, just we have attachments, we have countless things that are all not us, but they've been clinging to us for a long time. So they're a little hard to get off. They're like leeches, literally. They're just sucking our lifeblood away from us. But the real way that we grow spiritually is a seed. I have an apple tree in my backyard and has wonderful apples. And sometimes when I cut it open, there's a seed. And because everything in this world is a symbol of a greater reality, it's so amazing because I can stand in my kitchen. I can look at that seed, which of course is tiny. Apple seeds are not, they're not even like peach pits, they're just tiny things. I can look out the window and I can see the apple tree. I can look around the corner and see we have a small orchard. I can look at the apple trees. I look at the seed. I look at the apple tree. But the entire potential of the apple tree is right there in that little tiny seed. However, many, many stages of development have to take place before the potential of that apple seed becomes an apple tree. And you can be impatient, you can be embarrassed, you can be angry at that apple seed, you can bully it, you can encourage it on, and there's not one stage of growth that can be skipped. It just can't be done. The only way that life can be created is by the power of life itself gradually discovering itself and expressing itself. And of course, it's a mystery of creation, how that apple seed can know it's supposed to be an apple tree. How do it know? But it does know. And if an apple seed can know, our hearts certainly know who we are and where we're supposed to be. But our mind starts thinking this is who I'm supposed to be. And we try to force it, bully it. I spent years of my life being extremely hard on myself because I finally figured out, this is a little complicated, but welcome to my brain, okay? I always thought there was a much better version of me. And that much better version of me was maybe in the closet. And if I kept yelling in one way or another at the version of me that was out here, then at a certain point, that one would say, ha ha, big joke, and would go open the closet and the perfect me would walk out. And one glorious, awful day, I realized that this was me. This was it. Just a liberating moment of self-honesty. That this is it. But I'm an apple seed. I'll be an apple tree. I will be a self-realized master someday. Or even if I don't have to go that far, I'm going to be better tomorrow. I could be better tomorrow than I am today. And better means happier and freer. It doesn't mean more effective in the world, a bigger salary, more of this, more of that. It just means happier and free. What is it that we're looking for in our lives? The freedom to choose happiness is really what it comes to. So the most important thing to do in terms of our journey to self-awareness is just to open your arms and open your heart and say, well, this is who I am. And this is why all spiritual teachings constantly, proper teachings, constantly affirm how much you are loved exactly as you are. This is why Yogananda talked about God as Divine Mother, because the Father's close. There's this recording of Yogananda in his Indian Bengali accent saying, worship God as the Divine Mother. The Mother is closer than the Father. He says like that. The Mother is closer than the Father. And even in life, with all this gender fluidity that people are talking about. But that doesn't change the essential facts that there is yin yang in the universe. And those are the best ways to think of it, because otherwise we get into all this semi-political things that gets very confusing. But yin yang is a fact of the universe. There's yang energy, which we would think of as masculine, which not all, but most people who incarnate in male bodies have a force, a yang force. And there is yin energy, which is the feminine force. And most people who incarnate in female bodies, by no means all, have a predilection toward yin. But if you look at the yin yang symbol, it's a perfect circle. And both sides are completely equal. And what we're going to become is the whole circle. And whatever we call it, we don't have to even go to gender. We just all start somewhere on that circle. You don't see a beginning and an end in that, do you? You don't see a point where enter here, you know. You just start somewhere and then you explore the whole circle until you become perfectly balanced. This is what we're going to be. And we just become free. We're able to choose. And in that freedom, that's what really gives us happiness, is because we're always being influenced. You know, Yogananda put it in autobiography. He said, thoughts are universal, not individual. And we don't create our own consciousness. We merely attune ourselves to levels of reality that are present. It's nowadays I can hardly talk about television or radio because we don't have television and radio in the same way that we used to, but radio used to be the image. And still, you know how it works. We still know how it works. Well, you can just think of the internet. But the radio, it would be sending out these waves. And I mean, I was a child where I had a radio that was as big as I was when I was really small. You know, just a big case, and we had the big dial, and you could turn this big knob. You know, as a child, it was a marvelous toy. You turn this big knob, and then the dial would go across like this, and it would just pick up one thing after another, like that. And it was always in the room. That was what was so fascinating to me. Where do it come from? You know? But it was when the radio was tuned and became receptive, the radio became whatever it was attuned to. It's an exact image of our consciousness, an exact image. And our entire journey is to choose our influences and develop the power to live where we choose to live, rather than being compelled by habit, by fear, by limitation, by low energy, by the desire to be rescued, so that we're just caught on a wavelength that we don't want to be on. But what we have to understand is all we have to do is reattune ourselves. Now, how to do that? Oh yeah, there is that. And that's what sadhana is, spiritual practice is, discipline, self-development. But what else are we going to do with our time, friends? At the end of the whole story, when we're going to be alone with our consciousness, and the only thing that we're going to take with us when we walk out of this body is our consciousness. And guess what? We get to come back. And we get to try it again. And so eventually Lahiri Mahashaya, one of the line of this path, he said, eventually, why not now? And as I was talking about last night, you don't have to do it all at once. That apple seed does not become an apple tree all at once. It lives through all those stages, does each one of them as well as it can. And then when it is finished that stage, it automatically moves to the next. We don't have to worry. We just have to do the business at hand as best we can. Now, my friends, I'm going to ask Keshava to sing a couple of songs that he was going to sing at the beginning, and then I'll take questions for a while, okay?
This is a song written by Swami Kriyananda entitled, If You're Seeking Freedom. And freedom is to say soul freedom, soul perfection. We could also substitute that word for joy. If you're seeking freedom in a revolution, or if you're seeking freedom, you won't find it there. For once the guns stop blazing, you'll find it amazing how the world can drag on just as before. If you're seeking freedom in a marble mansion, oh, if you're seeking freedom, you won't find it there. For even when it's sunny, you'll be counting money, keeping up that showcase your face lined with care. And if you're seeking freedom on a throne of power, oh, if you're seeking freedom, you won't find it there. If once, for though men all obey you, what if they betray you? Tense you'll be in waiting for foes everywhere. But if you're seeking freedom, cast away desires, why barter like a beggar? You've wealth everywhere. For never can you buy it, grasp and you'll deny it. Freedom can't be hoarded, it's free as the air. And if you're seeking freedom, seek it on the mountains. Got sunlight on your shoulders, the wind in your hair. For there's no one can hold you, boss about or mold you. Once your heart is free, you'll be king everywhere. For once your heart is free, you'll be king everywhere. This next song, isn't it delightful? This next song is called I've Passed My Life as a Stranger, Lord. I've passed my life as a stranger, Lord. Roamed far in foreign lands, far, Lord, far too far. Only he who knows he's far from home, only he, Lord, understands. Only he who knows he's far from home feels the earth and understands. Sometimes a stranger did take me in, then love I thought was near. Love, Lord, where is love? As the winds upon the desert sand whisper hope, then disappear. As soft winds breathe on the desert sands, so love sighs, then disappears. Sometimes a child laughed and I did pause, and dreamed of joys at home, joys, Lord, only a dream. For what joy is there without your smile? Empty like the ocean's foam. For what joy is there without your smile? You're the sea, all else is foam. How long must I be a wanderer, Lord? You know where I belong. You know, yes, you know. Home is where my Lord's sweet presence is. I've grown tired of stranger songs. Home is where my Lord's sweet presence is. Bless me that I hear your songs. Bless me that I hear your songs.
You have any questions? I noticed last night when I stopped, there were about 6 hands still in the air, so I thought I would try again, see what I can do. Just okay, there we go. Right. Swamiji always encouraged us to go with our strengths. There's a tremendous inclination in our society right now to emphasize the negative, and we think that we'll get rid of our faults by concentrating on them. But all that happens when we concentrate on our faults is that we become aware of our faults. And rarely does concentrating on our faults actually cause us to overcome them. Whereas if we focus on where the energy is already flowing, what happens is if we do more of what works, the whole room full of furniture kind of starts moving up. And so the limitations will also come with us and operate on a slightly less terrible level. And when energy is flowing, you can learn things. Because when energy is flowing, experiences will start coming to you, and you'll start recognizing in the experiences that are coming to you the answers to the dilemmas that were behind you. So it's a bit like you can have a guru and don't worry, you're still going to be responsible for your life. You can just concentrate on on your strengths is the way to put it. You concentrate on your strengths and your weaknesses will find you. Trust me. But you will be stronger in your ability to deal with them. Just like when Swamiji said to me, maybe the karma's over, but I don't think so. But you have to grow in other ways before you're going to have the strength to come back to it. So what you're not abandoning the fight. You're just saying, I can't win yet. So let me build my muscles where I can build my muscles. And then when that karmic cycle comes back around, it will look different to me because I will be bigger and I will be looking at it from a different perspective. Whereas if I just sit there and try to make it better, generally speaking, we just get smaller. It's not only that we don't get bigger, that we actually get smaller. This is totally contrary to the way everybody thinks. Everybody thinks that you have to constantly enumerate your difficulties. You go in for your yearly review at your job and they'll give you a little bit of credit for the good, but then they'll just tell you all the things that your weaknesses are. It's utterly misguided and completely ignorant. But welcome to planet Earth in 2022. Utterly misguided and completely ignorant. And a rising force of light that we are all feeling. But you have to be, last night I think it was, well, there's only been 2 programs. Kesha sang Dare to Be Different, Dare to Be Free, which is one of my favorite songs. Just you have to dare to be different right now, and it doesn't matter who tells you. Most people are wrong. Swami used to make these global statements about people and the world, and I just used to rebel against it. But I'll be darned, as I get more and more life experience, they just keep coming to me, and not to make me cynical, just to make me realistic. Right. So I know from the way Swami raised me, which is how I think about it. I say I grew up at Ananda. People can't make that math work. I became a person. By the time Swami died, Kesha gave me this phrase. By the time Swami died, I was old enough to stay without a babysitter. That's about how old I got. And the babysitter left, So now I've had to, just be at home without a babysitter for all these years. But the way he raised me, I was filled with weaknesses and chaos, but he just always kept finding ways that I could do something well. And that solved everything else. Eventually. There is that little eventually, but that's part of what makes it work. Patience, trust. Okay, another question? Yes, Atul? Depends on the day. I'm a marvelously unsystematic person. Marvelous is probably not a good word for it. At one point, I realized I would eventually become a saint, but I would be a saint who talked a lot. And I've also come to figure out I am what I call a creative artist type, which is a way of saying I tend to thrive on what I feel like doing rather than what I'm supposed to do. I have to feel inspiration in it or else I don't do it. So some days I have a nice long meditation and I have time to read, I have time to chant. And some days, the Kriya that we practice, you practice it in units of 12. And at first you do 14 Kriyas, which is essentially the round of an inhalation and exhalation with certain concentration. Well, in our community, you would say on those days, 14 Om and out, instead of many hours of meditation and dozens of Kriyas, you just do 14. That's your minimum promise and you're done. So I don't actually have anything that you could point to as every day, partly because I've had to do night classes. I've had to postpone dinner until late. And my primary practice is devotion. My secondary practice is service. My third practice is meditation. So that would be the order in which my day looks like every day. Kriya, we meditate twice a day. We try to meditate at least an hour and a half a day. Swami actually recommended 3 hours a day. Sometimes you make it, sometimes you don't. And I've come to peace with that. Swami said to me, practice devotion, service, and meditation. And he put it in that order. And everything else will follow in relatively short order. Sir, relative to what? To this incarnation, to this summer, to eternity? What are we talking about? And I have friends who just, absolutely solid routine every day. It's never worked for me. So you'll get very different advice. You get one of my my tribe is what I call the people who've grown up just like I've grown up. You'll get a totally different answer. So this is the gospel according to Asha, not according to Master or to Swami. But I've had to come to peace with who I am, and this has been a very slow process. So now I'm at peace with it. I'm a Kriyacharya, which means I initiate people into Kriya. I teach people meditation. It's not that isn't a solid part of my life, but devotion, service, meditation for me. And devotion and service, devotion is everywhere and everything. Service is whoever needs me. And now that I have this global thing, everybody's on different time zones. The Zoom call comes in at 6:30 a.m., which doesn't give you a lot of long, leisurely meditation time. The class is over at 10. So I've had to come to peace with, and I offer it to people this way. Just be regular in your spiritual practice. That means that you can be annual and still be regular. But what that means is I am committed to this. And so that's how I think about it. I've never been able to commit to a schedule because it always felt to me that it interfered with my primary duty to serve. But I am absolutely committed, and whenever everything aligns, I follow as regularly as I can. And I'm traveling now, and you never know. I was in another city recently, and I was sitting down to have a nice long meditation because I had nothing to do. Then I realized, oh, my host is downstairs in the kitchen. And this is going to be the time. And they'd paid a lot of money to have me there. And I was only there for one more day. And I thought, this is the time to go downstairs and spend 2 hours with this person who was kind enough to bring me here. And it was very important. And so those are the kinds of decisions. And it suits my temperament. I have a Gemini temperament, and I am a creative artist. So I like what I like, but this is my apple seed. So it's a good question. This is my apple seed, and this is where I'm going to. I used to rail at myself for being myself, which is, think about that, That's what struck me one day. This is not working. How is that working for you? Not very well. Okay, another question? Yes, Frank. Mm-hmm. Well, there's a cosmic, a very. I have to say this, and I know I sound incredibly rah-rah for my own path, but I'll tell you this. I have never been asked a question that I couldn't think of something that Swami said that related to that. So it's because you ask a question like that and your mind starts spinning, and you can't really find it. So when he was alive, I was allowed, because of the karma we had, I could ask him anything. I really miss that because now I get conundrums I can't answer. But that one, right? Well, I just contradicted myself, didn't I? But anyway, what it is karma. Swamiji's, toward the end of his life, he said that all sentient beings, animals, human, he said he sees them all on a spectrum of egoic consciousness. And what he means by that is identification with the limited body that they're in. It's just animals are on the spectrum, and it goes all the way up until we transcend completely. But on the animal level, their progress is automatic. They have some individual karma, but they're just on the conveyor belt moving up. And I often think when you see dogs, and as I said, I'm not an animal person very much, but I see dogs and they just run around and they're so happy all the time and they sniff and they explore, like this. And then finally some of them get to be service dogs. And I think what a relief it must be to have meaningful work. But I mean, seriously, because just running around sniffing all the time, good God. Just like another day of being enthusiastic about the tennis ball. I mean, there must be some part of them that just, on some level, knows it. So then they get to have meaningful work. And horses, and they get to do something useful, challenging. What happens is you incarnate the jiva, and that's the word. It's a better word than soul. The individual spark of divinity that is unique to every individual, that is the same all through the animal bodies and everything. The jiva is putting bodies on and off. Yogananda said he remembered, this is so mind-boggling. Yogananda said he remembers all the way down to the level of a diamond. And how long does it take a diamond? This is a question I asked Swami. Swami, how long does it take a diamond to finish being a diamond? I was hoping for a much better, more interesting answer. The first thing he said to me was, That is a really stupid question because it's a useless question. You're not a diamond. What's good is that going to do? That's what he meant. I think he actually said stupid, although he's not inclined to use words like that. But that's how I heard it. By that point in my life, I was completely at ease. I said, I thought it was a very interesting question, and who can I ask but you? And so he just kind of brushed it off. And then a second later, he said, all time is short compared to eternity, which was not really an answer, but it was interesting. But the jiva, which is the river heading for the ocean, is going to get to the ocean. And we incarnate in a body that is sufficient to express the level of consciousness we have developed up to that point. And a dog has more options than a clam, for example. And so when we finish doing everything that we can learn from being a clam, we move up to perhaps being a fish that moves around. We finally get to be a dolphin. Then we get to get onto land. We get to associate with humans. And at a certain point, the nervous system of the animal body is insufficient to express the level of awareness and possibility that we've reached. And then you get a human body. But the human body has several unique characteristics. One of them is that the human nervous system, every human nervous system, is subtle enough that you can live in it and have your consciousness be infinite. The nervous system of a lizard or a kitten, it has many virtues, but the perception of infinity is not possible with that nervous system. This is how Yogananda put it. This is not me making this up. But when we also become, and we get into a human nervous system, we also have the capacity to objectively consider our condition. And see, this is what animals lack. That puppy who's running around sniffing and doing all these things, he can't think, there were 7 other puppies in my litter. I wonder where they are now. I heard that puppy number 1 has gone to Argentina and lives in a palace now. Why am I stuck in this shack with these mean children? He can't do that because he can't objectively reflect on his circumstances. He has willpower, he has response, but he lacks that. The human brain can objectively reflect on its circumstances, or subjectively, but see it in context. And then, therefore, many other possibilities come to us. We can learn the word penultimate, and we can figure out that the tennis ball should be brought here, for various reasons. And then we start making choices. Because up until that point, just the automatic flow to the sea is happening. But now we get to decide how fast, how slow, how many whirlpools we play in, how many diversions we take, how many angers and vengeances we carry, like that. But when we make a free choice for what will really bring us happiness, that's entirely different. So it's the innocence of ignorance and the innocence of wisdom. And it's wonderful. And that means taking care of animals and helping them to evolve is wonderful. Everybody stands somewhere and needs to move the next step toward the ocean. Okay? You had a question.
It's so inspiring to hear your stories about your relationship with your teachers, who were your friends, fathers, mothers, students, teachers. What is your advice for mothers raising kids nowadays? I guess my question is not to be the rescuer.
Not to be the what?
The rescuer.
Rescuer. Is that what you said?
To rescue.
Yeah, rescue. Uh-huh.
Space. Even though maybe I want to guide them.
Oh, no, you should guide them, absolutely. I've never raised a child. I mean, I never birthed a child, never raised a child. I had some involvement with my only nephew. I say that, this is full disclosure. But I think I've raised so many children, I get the story. And one of the more surprising things in my life is that I never did have children because I intended to have a dozen. But at a certain point, I'll just finish that because I realized what I was looking for was self-expansion. And even if I had 12 children, I wouldn't actually expand in the way that really mattered to me, which was to change my own consciousness. So I just realized that wasn't my dharma. but I somehow I get it. Do you have children, I presume? Are you asking? Yeah. Okay. Here, Swamiji started with this. He said, the man and the woman create the vehicle for the jiva, for the soul, to express its destiny. I mean, that is a physiological function. The sperm and the ovum come together. There's a flash of light in the astral world, and some consciousness that is, some jiva that is ready to incarnate, Master said, comes in right at that moment. If they're in tune with that flash of light, they come into it. So there's a whole science of conscious conception and the soul that you invite into your life, but it may be a little late to represent that to you. So, but nonetheless, it exists and people at Ananda know it. I don't, because it's never been relevant. But the man and the woman create the physical vehicle for the soul to express its destiny, but the mother and father do not create either the soul or its destiny. So even though, and of course you have to add reincarnation here because none of this makes any sense unless you think that way, when that child is born to you, even they're small and helpless and require an enormous amount from you, their full intelligence and their full spiritual potential, which is to say whatever they ended with the last time, is already present. But they lack the context or the language to be able to express it. But if you're sensitive, you feel it and you see it. Mothers tell me that every child in their womb, if they've had more than one from the beginning, it is somebody very specific, and it continues throughout. Now, having said all of that, unfortunately, many people take that to mean, well, I should just stand back and let that soul express its destiny. But that is, I believe, an abdication of your responsibility. You have a karmic responsibility to help that soul evolve in the way that, as far as you can tell, is going to be the most helpful for them. Now, people have very different ideas of the as far as I can tell, but I have never seen it work out when the parents decide, well, you're a full soul, you'll just do what you want, because that is not the rules of life. That's not why you become a parent. And if you have a deeply held belief that this is a valid way to live anything, why would you not share it? You share it with the perfect stranger on the airplane when they ask you. Why would you not share it with someone who has recognized the flash of light in the astral world and come to you because they have a karma with you, something that you're supposed to do? So when people say to me, well, I don't want to interfere with their destiny is to have you as a parent. And it simply doesn't work unless, now, then you have to do that graciously, respectfully, intuitively. Just because I always wanted a child who would be a musician, and what you've got is a soccer player, you can't try to make that child play the violin because he wants to play soccer or she wants to play soccer. So, but to think that you have no responsibility to facilitate that child's destiny is not your job. Your job is, one of the reasons I never had children is because I understood that too much, and I realized I didn't, it wasn't, if I did that, I wouldn't be able to do the rest of what I was asked to do. And with all due respect, I have enormous sympathy for families where everybody's working and there isn't the leisure, and that's just the life we lived in. But one should, as much as possible, do what you can to listen to what your child is trying to accomplish and help them accomplish it. Help them become a capable human being in this world. And if you do that in the right way, which is teach them principles, teach them discipline as much as you can, teach them how the world works. And then as they get older and have more self-determination, they will have tools. And in our desire to respect their free will, we give them no tools. And we give them no values, and we give them no context. And what's the result of that? This, teenage depression, teenage drug use, alcoholism, suicide, just nihilism on a horrible level, because people think that freedom means to just stand back and let them crash. And again, you wouldn't do that for anyone else. Why would you do that for your children? But you apply it in terms of principle, not as if you own them and you must. And you can see it's a tremendous and a wonderful sadhana. Parenting is a magnificent sadhana, and it takes a whole lot of your time and energy. And if you ever think even for a split second that, I'll just have a baby and then I'll go back to my life, it's like you're out of your mind. It's never going to happen. And it never happens even, they're 45 years old and they're still your little baby. That's just the end of it. That's the way the story is. Everybody knows it. Because I'm in community, if I were just living by myself without children, I wouldn't be in such a story. But a lot of kids that almost in some cases I literally saw born are now my peers. And so I get to sort of see how the whole thing has worked itself out. And I've seen what good parenting brings to children. I completely separated myself from what my parents' life was or what they thought I might do, never antagonistically, but they raised me really well so that when I decided to go my own way, I knew how to do it. And for a very brief period, my father and my mother, when I was a Jewish person and they accidentally discovered that I loved Jesus, that took about 20 years. But when it happened, they all of a sudden decided that maybe there was a problem here. They'd never seen one before. I would have to tell you with my mother, I don't know how many of you, the Jewish culture is a comedy routine, so you sort of also know this. I'm having this conversation with my mother. My mother is telling me, they've passed away 20 years ago. My mother's saying to me, because we were culturally Jewish, we weren't religious. My mother's saying to me, if only we had raised you in the Jewish religion, then this wouldn't have happened. You can do anything as a Jew except love Jesus, anything. If only we had raised you, this wouldn't have happened. I'm trying to reassure my mother by saying, no, Mom, it just was really who I am. You all did a great job. And a little voice inside of me says, let her take the blame. So I literally said, oh, yes, Mom, who knows what would have happened? We did that for a couple of minutes, and she didn't know it was a comedy routine. We were just doing it. Subject never came up again. Because tragedy, we knew how to do. And when my dad sort of, during that same little visit, tried to sort of say something, I looked at him and I said, you raised me with so much integrity to believe in myself and my ideas and to think for myself. I would think you would be proud of me. And he went like, oh. I'd hoisted him on his own petard, as that word goes, and he knew it was right. But, I did nothing that they expected me to do. But because of them, I was able to do it. Does that make sense? Okay, one more and then we'll, Mike?
I wanted to bring up this effort in the context of devotion, service, and meditation, because what I've been learning is that in meditation we're exercising our brain and nervous system so that we have a higher potential for connection. So just a simple question is, really, where can we go?
The effort should be in where go with your strengths and then bring the rest of it up along behind you. There is no dogma in self-realization. And people get very, very confused. So I'm very glad you asked this question. This is what I should do. This is what I ought to do. And you can read Master's teaching. You can read Yogananda's teaching. And with all due respect, some of the people who publish Yogananda's writings make it very declarative. I'm a writer, so I recognize this. There's two major publishers for Yogananda's teaching. There's ours and there's the other one. It's not even worth talking about. They edit in a declarative way. So the sentences of the guru are do this, do this, do this, do this. This will happen, that will happen. If you're not a writer, you don't even notice it. You just read it. Swami edits Master's writings into a cooperative venture. Declarative sentences are the death of true spirituality. Shoulds are the death of the evolution of your own heart. You have to be where you are, do the very best you can with what you can do. And don't spend a split second lamenting what you can't do. If you were meant to be different, you would be different. Guess what? You know, it's like you just can't force it because you don't like it. And if you're at war with yourself, you accomplish nothing. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't strive. Meditation is great, but in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, Swami writes in his commentary, selfless service is the best way to overcome the ego. And devotion solves everything. Love casts out all fear and all limitation. So, and meditation changes the brain. And without meditation, I don't know how people live. Without being able to just stop the rock from rolling down the hill, at least for a couple of minutes a day. Otherwise, you're just a free floating object that has no anchor. So which of those is the best? Well, Monday one, Tuesday the next. For these 10 years this, then the next 20 years that. And of course, there's rules, there's guidelines, there's suggestions, and you, at your peril, you reject them. You know, to say, well, this is what's true for me. No, you say right now, this is where my energy flows. I mean, there was one woman who was an integral part of our community. She just couldn't meditate. But she attended every event. She loved everything we did. She sang the music like an angel. She was just a wonderful, wonderful example of someone who lived for the spirit. And she was a lousy meditator. I said, well, everything else will follow in relatively short order. You know, so be at peace with yourself. But people think to be at peace with yourself is to give up the effort. No, not at all. It's to say, well, this is what I'm good at. Let me go forward. And as you go forward, you see you change yourself. And then as you change, you look at something. I mean, I see that now fantastically. I'm 100% different than I was 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, I was 100% different than I was 10 years before. So it works. As long as, it's very simple, as long as you don't quit. People ask me, what's the best advice spiritually? And I'll end at this point because we were late for lunch. The best advice is spiritually is don't quit. Okay? Bless you.